Just thinking from a macro perspective, about what happened over the last 30 years and what's going to happen now, you would assume that if cost minimization as a priority is replaced by the need for resilience, so if the G7 and these governments are willing to tolerate higher costs, in return for a bit more, security of supply, that would imply that profit margins generally are not going to be as high as they were, and therefore valuations which were based off those kind of profit margins will also come down. It also would tend to suggest that it's going to be more difficult to deal with inflation.
Welcome back to Breakout from Breaking Views, brought to you by PGIM. I'm Peter Thal Larsen, the global editor of Reuters Breaking Views, and I'm joined by Felix Martin. Felix, good to have you back again.
Thank you very much, Peter. Always good.
So Felix, this week you've taken a deep dive into the changing framework of global economic policy. We've heard a lot about how free trade, free markets, financial liberalization, that period is over or coming to an end. But what's less clear is sort of what's taking its place, and you've had a go at sort of sketching out what the framework looks like. So tell me a bit about what you've learned.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this thing, like you said, it's sort of crept up on us, and I have to say that I had not appreciated quite how major and well defined, this volte-face has been. But what I've done is I went and looked at the three very important speeches that have come out from the US side. The most important of all is from Jake Sullivan at the end of April, the US National Security Advisor. And no coincidence, I think, that this was a speech, the major speech setting out the new economic policy agenda that came from, the nation's top securocrat. And then there's a couple of other really interesting speeches. One is Janet Yellen's gloss on that, the US Treasury Secretary, and then another speech which was made by Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank. So that's from the sort of central banking perspective.
So if we're going to, particularly thinking about this from a sort of investment viewpoint, if you can no longer rely on sort of free trade and free flows of capital being the sort of the priority, what are the priorities now?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, really what's happened is a pretty thorough repudiation of, the basic tenets of what those of us, investors who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, that we grew up with. We grew up with the idea of free markets at home, domestically, and free trade being the priority internationally. And both of those things, Jake Sullivan makes absolutely clear, Yellen backs up, are no longer the priorities. On both sides, national security is the priority. So when you're talking domestically, I mean, there are some obvious consequences for investors, the military industrial complex, at least the parts of it that are levered to the kinds of conflicts and confrontations that are coming. They're doing well. Gave a few examples in the piece. And then internationally, it's really about friendshoring rather than offshoring. It's about erecting these barriers, but also bringing supply chains either onshore or onto into friendly networks. And so that provides another kind of lens for investment, because of course it means that currencies, bonds, equity markets of the allies of the US and the other G7 members, probably liable to do quite well, and vice versa for the antagonists.
Yeah, and you mentioned an example. I think is it Mexico is the best performing currency and the major emerging market currency this year, partly because people sort of see it as a beneficiary of attracting some of this manufacturing that might be coming from China and elsewhere. But I guess, the other thing then is just sort of thinking about it again with a sort of financial hat on, is if it's all about, if security and national security sort of comes first, then I guess we also have to assume that the things are going to fall by the wayside. So low costs, sort of maximum efficiency, those things might not necessarily be the priority anymore.
No, that's exactly right. So again, just thinking from a macro perspective, about what happened over the last 30 years and what's going to happen now, you would assume that if cost minimization as a priority is replaced by the need for resilience, so if the G7 and these governments are willing to tolerate higher costs, in return for a bit more, security of supply. That would imply that, you know, profit margins generally are not going to be as high as they were, and therefore, you know, valuations which were based off those kind of profit margins will also come down. It also would tend to suggest that it's going to be more difficult to deal with inflation. And that's where this speech from Christine Lagarde, by the way, comes in.
Yeah, because she's sort of saying basically this is a new world, and the objective of trying to normalize monetary policy runs somewhat counter to what's going on in terms of national security.
Right. I would strongly recommend. I don't usually recommend people to read the speeches of any central bankers, actually, least of all necessarily the president of the European Central Bank. But this one is a very interesting speech. It's really quite perspicacious on the consequences of these real sector constraints which are being imposed. So what I mean by that is constraints on trade and on, you know, domestic industry, what it means for the job of central banks. She basically says, listen, you know, this period of great success that G7 central banks had in targeting inflation was based upon you know, a world in which there was free trade, very elastic global supply, hundreds of millions of workers coming in from the Eastern Bloc and China and so on. And if those conditions are now disappearing, which they definitely are, it makes the job of central banks much more difficult. And I think, you know, we can see that in front of our eyes with what's going on with inflation now. But it's a major problem, a major potential contradiction between, you know, the national security agenda coming out of this new securonomics, as Rachel Reeves, the UK Shadow Chancellor, has christened it, and the way that central banks have operated for 30 years.
Yeah. Fascinating, Felix, as always. You can read that column, Felix's column, on breakingviews.com with links to those speeches that you talked about if people want to dive more deeply into the subject. But thank you for your time, Felix, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Likewise.